you don't know InSPIRES, this webinar is organized within this project, InSPIRES, which is a project that aims to build effective cooperation between science and society. And we want to do that by supporting the growth of science shops and enabling the expansion of responsible research and innovation in Europe. And we want to do that focusing on specific societal challenges. And we are already doing it through the different science shops that have been created or that have been further promoted, the ones that were already existing within the project. And one of the main goals of science shops, or the main challenges that science shops face, is to ensure its sustainability over the long term. And one main strategy to achieve this is by making sure that policymakers such as founders, political representatives, and senior university managers understand and appreciate how science shops can help them to deliver on their own relevant priorities. The experience of long-standing science shops suggests that policy work is vital for the long-term success. And we are very glad today to have two very long experienced persons who have been working for a long time in the field of science shops and in the policy work we have mentioned now. So this demonstrates that their effort at policy level has made their science shops sustainable over the long term. And we would like to learn from you too. I will give the floor to Josep, and he will introduce our two speakers today.
Yes. So today we will hear the experience of McKenna, who is the coordinator of the Queen's University Belfast Science Shop since 2001, so a long time ago. And also with Catherine Bates, who is also coordinator of the program for students learning with communities, also for 10 years now. So we have a long-standing science shops here giving us their tips and their also experience for the new science shops and for all types of science shops. And so I would like to remind that the session is being recorded, and then anybody who is not attending now because any reason, then this person could be able to see again the webinar uploaded on the InSPIRES website. So now we can start with this interesting presentation that the speakers will give us, and afterwards maybe we can open the chat or open the floor for the questions that you may have. So I would suggest to start with the presentation, and after the presentation start asking questions and starting the debate. Okay? So Emma and Catherine, the floor is yours.
Okay. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Fantastic.
Okay. And Catherine, I think you're going to start.
Yes, so just to very briefly to say thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's great to have the opportunity. And also to mention that pretty much everything we know about policy work we learned largely from our collaboration with Queen's University in Belfast. So I definitely am saying that of anyone sitting here presenting, it's definitely not me who is the expert on this. So just to clarify that at the start. So our program for students learning with communities in DIT was established in 2008. It supports community engaged research or RRI or science shop projects. We don't use the term science shop. It doesn't work brilliantly for us in our context. But we support those projects, but also community engaged learning or service learning within the curriculum across DIT. So we would have on average 1,000 students a year involved, but just they're not all involved in science shop projects. We would have a number of students involved in class projects where they're doing more collaborative work generally. Might be tutoring children in schools and things like that. So we don't have 1,000 students doing science shop projects, just to clarify. We wish we did. And we would have around 50 academic staff directly supervising projects every year across the institute, and roughly 1 in 3 full-time undergraduate programs offer their students the opportunity to do these kind of collaborative pieces of work with communities. So that's me.
Okay, and as Giuseppe said, I'm Emma McKenna and I work in the science shop in Queen's University in Belfast, so we're neighbours with Catherine. We were established in 1988, so this is our 30th anniversary year. We're a joint project with the other university in Northern Ireland, which is called Ulster University, which means in practice that we jointly face into the community, but then behind that we both work separately with our own students. We complete about 65 projects a year on behalf of community organisations, and we work across all disciplines and across Northern Ireland as well. Although in practice we have a strength probably in social science and environmental science disciplines. And just for a bit of context, Queen's is a research intensive university, so while a lot of our work is through teaching and learning, the research side is also quite important in our context. So that's just giving you some sense of what it is that Catherine and I do.
Emma, could you switch on the webcam as well, just to see you and Catherine in the screen? Because now we just see the presentation and Catherine. Thank you. Now, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. It's just I can't see my screen so well when I do that. Okay. So the first question is around why we do policy work, and you know, people who've joined us here do have some sense already probably about the importance of it, because it can seem like an add-on if you've already got a busy job and you know there's a lot of community demand for what you do. Doing the policy work can seem like an extra thing that you don't really have time for. This is something that we did in the PERARES project, so public engagement with research and research engagement with society. We went out, and it was European Commission funded, we went out to talk to long-standing science shops and ask them about their experiences and how they had embedded their work and how their work had sustained over the long term. And they said the policy work was vital in that. So what they talked about was taking time to make sure that people in power understand the value of what they did, and especially how what the science shop did contributed to the priorities of either the institution or their own policy making context. And if you don't do this work, then your initiative is vulnerable. And this is something we've seen over the years, because between Catherine and ourselves, we've mentored a lot of science shops as well. Where people do the policy work, the project is much more likely to embed. And I should say that in terms of the PERARES project, most of our focus was on higher education-based science shops, but we hope that some of the things that we've done are more broadly applicable as well. And the biggest piece of advice was that if you're establishing a science shop, consider how it will connect to all existing policies and strategies. And that's what the next slide is really talking about. Typically in a higher education institution, you have 3 key priority areas, which one may take a higher priority than the other in your own context. So in our context, the research is the key priority, and then there's education and there's third mission. I think that's a bit more balanced probably in DIT. I know that education is a much higher priority there. So you need to think about your own institution and what the key priorities are there. So for example, if you think about a science shop, in terms of the research side, we all know that RRI and research impact is more and more important to policymakers in higher education, and indeed to higher senior managers in higher education institutions. And if you can demonstrate that you're working with societal partners, that nowadays really is important for those people. So what we would say is that science shops bring the research needs of CSOs into higher education curricula, and that helps to contribute to research impact. In terms of education, and some of the education side is coming from the EnRRICH project, which Catherine and myself have both been involved in as well. Science shops also contribute to modernising the academic curriculum, and to developing student skills and employability, again, both of which are important in all higher education institutions. And then there's this idea of third mission. It's called different things in different places, but the idea that you need to serve the needs of the society who funds your higher education institution and your higher education system. And the Science Shop can contribute to all three of these missions. And in some ways that's difficult, because if you can fit in everything, sometimes you're left out of everything as well. And I guess our advice would be, of course, you have to work to your own management line first and foremost, but that you also need to keep a watching brief outside of that. And I was just going to say that in the PERARES project, we developed a practical guide to developing policy and strategy. And that you can see it on the screen. There are very few paper copies left, but it's also on the Living Knowledge website as well. And you're very welcome to go on and download it, because there's more detail there. And as I say, this is not something that we just came up with on our own. This is based on the knowledge of long-standing science shops and similar initiatives. So, for example, the Dutch science shops were very active in supporting us to develop this, because they had very long experience. So this is a wealth of knowledge from the Living Knowledge community, and I would really encourage you to look at it. So I think, yes, I'll hand over to Catherine now to talk about some of the detail that's in the booklet.
And just to say that the booklet, and I can say this because I wasn't involved in producing it, but it's a really simple, clear kind of pulling together of a whole lot of experience and research, as Emma said there. It's just a really good handbook, so it's definitely worth downloading. And as I say, I wasn't involved in writing it, so I don't have any, I'm not getting any money for that advertisement. So the first of the sort of maybe the things to think about when looking at developing policy work is looking at what's going on, what's the context for you in your higher education institution. So it's not just your own institution, but it's also the broader context in which your institution is operating. So if you look at, national policies, if you look at regional policies, if you're in a larger federal country, if you look at international policies, if you're in the European Union, it's important to look at what's coming out of the European Commission in terms of funding calls and so on, and policy statements. And they're then useful levers to make the case in your own institution. It's also look at your own institution. So what is your strategic plan in your institution? What is the strategic plan? And are there new strategies being developed? Because often there are lots of other types of strategies within the institution. There is the overarching strategic plan, but then within that you might have, or feeding into that, you might have different plans and policy documents that it's worthwhile knowing about, and look out for any new ones as well. If there sort of seems to be a movement of people who are looking to develop something new, can you look out for that. And then another thing within higher education that's useful is maybe looking at school or directorate reviews as well. So if there's a school or a unit, whatever your academic units are called, if they are being reviewed, I know in DIT we go through a 5-year review process. That's a process of identifying goals as well as reviewing what they've actually done. And so that again might be worth looking at, because if you can see that there's goals identified in the strategic plan or strategic review that you can feed into, or that you can say, look, this science shop work helps you to achieve this, that can be a very valuable, you're bringing something valuable to the people in that area. And then funding streams, definitely. Again, if you're looking at Horizon 2020, obviously there's a big, there's a SWAF stream, but there's also an RRI as sort of a cross-cutting theme, but also local funding schemes. Emma's already mentioned things like research impact and how important that is. And so if there's funding that has a big emphasis on research impact, then this is something that you can go to people in your institution and say, look, this is a big trend in funding, this is a way to deliver impact. The Sustainable Development Goals also are becoming more or certainly in Ireland, we're starting to see them filtering from the European Commission into national funding calls in Ireland. Challenge-based funding calls and so on are being issued. So that's important. And then also other things like graduate attributes and employability skills for students. Again, if there's funding calls that are coming out for teaching and learning innovations, this can be something valuable. So it's really about knowing what's going on out there and knowing what are the things that people are prioritising. And doing that research, and sometimes it could be sitting and reading documents, but sometimes it can be talking to other people who are very knowledgeable about this area or who are very well connected. Emma, back to you.
So in terms of then the next kind of stages, so the first stage that you've done is look around and see what's happening in your institution. The next stage is around building alliances. So it's trying to develop relationships with the key people who can support the work that you're doing in the science shop. And I mean, what we were hearing from people is that one of the beginning points is to analyze your networks. And, you know, you'll always have a network of people around anyway, but look at who those people are and what kind of information they can share with you about what's going on in the institution. Practice your arguments. One of our colleagues developed an elevator pitch, which they went on to use on their vice chancellor because they bumped into him on a train. You know, so have your argument ready in a succinct way so that if you happen to be talking to someone, you can explain the value of the science shop very, very quickly. Identify relevant professional networks. So within your institution, what are there, you know, for example, in Queen's now, we have a public engagement practitioners network, which is just people who are interested in public engagement. But that's one very nice group of people for me if I'm trying to develop some ideas or to think things through. We also have a director of education forum. So those are people who are interested in teaching and learning. So you identify those kind of relevant networks where you might be able to go in and speak to people. The other thing is to talk to people at all levels, because sometimes you might find the person writing a policy document isn't the person whose name will be on it in the end. It's their assistant, or it's their research assistant, or it might be their secretary, or, you know, it's someone else actually doing the writing. So while, yes, of course, you want the senior people to know what you're doing, often it's people at other levels who really can help you and support you and make sure the senior person hears your argument. In fact, at the Public Engagement Professional Network meeting a few days ago, someone said, don't speak to senior researchers, speak to junior researchers, because they're the ones the senior researchers listen to, which was a good piece of advice. Identify networking opportunities. So it could be, certainly I know I found staff training very useful because you meet people from all over the university at training programs. You know, even things like we have a physical education centre. Sometimes you bump into people there, you know, you're taking classes. Some of it's informal, some of it's formal, but identify where those spaces are in your institution and develop relationships with people. And particularly so you have people to ask if you're not sure about things, which is also very useful. And one person actually, when we were doing this research, said they had been trying to influence a senior manager for a long time. And completely by accident, they brought to their attention a project that had been done in this person's hometown. And all of a sudden, they just got what it was, what the value of the science shop was, because they knew and understood the context there. And that was quite an interesting thing, that sometimes it's as personal as that. Making the argument might be because you are talking about cancer care and the person, the senior manager you're talking to, has had a family member experience cancer recently. So you don't know sometimes the arguments that will connect with someone, and it's worth having a range of arguments. So this is really about, in the stages of developing this policy plan, starting to build your alliances and to link out to other people. And I think, Catherine, you're going to talk about making your case and informing.
Yeah, and just to follow up on your example of the elevator pitch, I have a good example of where I absolutely didn't do that in a situation where it would have been ideal. I found myself very early at a very large institute meeting, and I thought, okay, I'll just do some emails. So I took out the computer, did some emails. The president walked into the institution, or walked into the room, and sort of said hello and sat down, could see that I was busy and sat down. And the two of us sat there on our own for 10 minutes, and I was frantically thinking, what is the key thing I want to bring to his attention? And there were so many different things. I couldn't make a decision. So then the moment kind of passed and other people started coming in, and I thought, well, here we are, and we've been working for years on projects, and we've been talking about elevator pitches, and I'm just after missing my fantastic opportunity. So in a way, because I suppose often when I'm thinking about policy, I'm trying to influence external policymakers. So for example, you're trying to influence, maybe research funders to say, look, really, can you try and make sure you've, really looking for proper engagement in research and what a difference that makes in terms of the effectiveness of the research and everything. But I hadn't actually thought through a simple, clear objective for our own president in our own institution. I mean, he's generally very supportive of this work anyway, but just at that moment, I kind of froze. So I would say prepare a series of elevator pitches, maybe, for a series of different scenarios and contexts, so that if a golden opportunity comes along, you don't miss it, as I did. So, so that's one example of the of how not to do an elevator pitch, or how to not do an elevator pitch and don't do that yourselves. I mean, I'm skipping a little bit ahead on the slide, but ensuring that people with influence know and understand the work that you're doing is really important, and that's not necessarily just those opportune moments when you do the elevator pitch. It's also like our science shop has been around for 10 years, but this year, for the first time, we decided, right, we need to meet every head of school in the institution, so we would have 24 heads of school. So we contacted all of them to see would they meet us, so that we could find out what they're doing in the area and also look at how we can support them in achieving their goals. And as I say, that's after 10 years. So we probably should have done this a lot earlier, to be honest. And the people who we have met have been, very interested and very receptive. And we've learned a lot about what their thinking is and also what they're actually trying to achieve in their areas. And that's been really helpful to us. So this idea of, sitting down and making appointments to talk to people with influence so that they know what it is we're doing. And that you can correct any slight misperceptions, or sometimes people kind of understand, oh yeah, you're collaborating, but they don't necessarily understand the philosophy of it, and the idea that it's about doing the engagement as early as possible in the research process as well. It's not just that sort of science communication piece at the end, and in fact, obviously in a science shop, we're really hoping it isn't just that science communication bit at the end. So that is really important, that people know what it is that the science shop is. Create an exemplar project, that's obviously really important. If you have a really good example of a science shop project that you can then take around and showcase at different events and to different people, and preferably one that also helps achieve multiple goals of the institution. So again, going back to Emma's discussion early on about the sort of the three main goals, the research, the learning and teaching, and the third mission or external engagement, these projects generally do tick all those three boxes. But if you have one that really, somebody from any of those areas could look at and think, oh yes, that's a really good way of doing more of that kind of thing, or we'd like to be involved in that kind of thing, then that's a really good idea. What's also important, I mean, the internal awareness is definitely as important as the external awareness as well. So sometimes you sort of think, oh yeah, we have to put this on our website so people outside will see it. But also you have to remember, you want people in your own institution to see it, because you're raising awareness and possibly also encouraging more staff to get involved, which will help embed it more, if they start supervising the projects. So for example, on our institution, there's a rotating slideshow on the homepage, and it sort of shows current activities and recent stories. And so we read them stories every now and then, so that we would pop up on slideshows because they're displayed around on big screens. And then is there a national body that supports this activity, where you could all showcase projects? So national network or something. Could you give examples of the projects that you do? Put it up on their website as well. And you can tell your internal people that this is now being showcased on the external website, and that helps to kind of build credibility. And also people are more impressed, the more attention that you get, and then publicly the work is shown. So helps as well. So making things visible is really important, like that, social media, the communications of our own institution, contacts in the press, just putting it out there is really important. And you can see it where we don't really lobby, but we go to places where we know people will be, and we make presentations and we talk to them after. One of the people who was interviewed as part of the work that Emma was doing in relation to developing sort of policy papers and things. And of course, going to places where people of influence is is lobbying, you know, and it is policy work. So so it's sometimes people think that policy work involves sitting down and writing a policy document, but certainly, as I say, what I really learned from working with Emma and Eileen in Queen's and with colleagues internationally is actually there's so many different ways to do it, and it doesn't have to be a formal sit down thing. And then in terms of making your case, then involving people and participating in policy fora. So you know, can you give a senior manager an honorary role on an advisory board, or include them in your publicity materials, make sure they're getting credit. One thing that some colleagues in another area of our office have done, which we're looking to adopt now, is can you get your directors or your vice chancellors, or whatever the term is in your institution, but can you get them, for example, to present toward their staff or student areas who have been involved in science shop projects? So it's not you that doing this work are getting awards, but that their own senior manager are aware of it and come present the award. Keeping in touch with policymakers obviously is essential. So, you know, what's going on, who's doing what, can you get on a list for, you know, people doing consultations around strategies. Twitter is really useful for this, and again, this is something I've learned from Emma, because I was never, and I still don't tweet, but we sometimes retweet stuff. Just following policy organisations in this area on Twitter and just seeing what it is, because they'll put up a tweet if they have a policy consultation. Or if they're looking for members for a board or something like that, it might go up as well. So definitely that's a very useful thing to do. Obviously going to any policy consultations that come out, and volunteering for groups and informal discussions. So something that happened recently in Ireland is that a new system performance framework was brought in for the higher education sector. And for the first time that included metrics that all of the institutions had to report on, that included industry projects, engaged projects with industry, projects or programs that were co-designed with employers. So there was a lot of reference to industry and employers. And so we were involved in the process. We were asked would we contribute data to our internal institutional data collection process. And so we spoke to the person who was coordinating the data, and we sat down with her and we said, look, you know where it says employers? Well, community partners of CSOs are also employers, so we can include science shop projects and we count these. And she said, oh yeah, I don't see why not. That sounds very plausible. And again, we made the case for industry, so we would have social care programs here in DIT. And so we said, well, the industry partners for social care students are often CSOs, because that might be where they end up working. So again, can we include science shop projects when we're talking about that? And she was quite happy with that approach. And then she brought that approach to her conversation then with the person from our national funding body, who are the people who were collecting the metrics, and said, look, we're proposing to take this approach. What do you think? And they were quite open to that. So again, informal enough conversations can actually have a knock-on effect, and you're directly then, not directly, but indirectly, those points go forward to the policymakers, which again can be a really valuable way of progressing the work. And then again, a quote there, I commented on a paper adding in the words "and community" where business was mentioned, and now community is mentioned right through our educational philosophy. So even something really small like that, you know, policy documents, there's a lot of stuff, particularly in higher education. People are emailing stuff out and saying, can you please give me feedback on this document? And everybody's so busy. You might be the only person giving feedback on a document, so you might actually have a huge influence potentially. And so it's really worth sometimes just looking at a document and thinking, can I give this 10 minutes, even just suggest a couple of small word changes that will just make it a little bit easier then for you to use that to promote your science shop and that kind of work. So back to Emma.
Thank you. The last point was prepare to mobilise, and this is probably the kind of almost depressing bit, because you can get to a point where you think your initiative is really embedded. You know that you have really good support, people understand what you do, but that doesn't mean it's secure. And I think the Dutch science shops particularly, there was a big change in context in the Netherlands, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and there was a really strong threat to the Dutch science shops, who are by far the best established in Europe. So this is partly why this came in. Things change, you know, senior leaders, policy contexts change, and you need to be ready in case your context changes. And I mean, from our own perspective, we about 6 years ago, we were in our research division in the university, which is a good place to be because research is very important here. There was really a focus on research impact in local community. We were part of the regional office at that time. So we had colleagues who were reaching out to business. And we had right to the top, we had senior managers who really understood and supported what we did. But around that time in UK universities, the focus became much more about internationalisation. And that led to some changes. Our very senior manager left because he was promoted. Well, you know, he got a vice chancellor post, in fact. The impact of that was that then the director underneath him left very soon afterwards. And then our office, the decision was made that actually the university needed to reinvest in internationalisation. So the regional office was broken apart. And because we had made a point of keeping in touch with our colleagues in the teaching and learning and education side of the university, making sure that they understood the value of the science shop for education, at that time a decision was taken to move the science shop into the education part. And in many cases that could have been a point when a decision was taken that the science shop would just stop existing. And I think partly because we still had the protection of the most senior manager in making that move, and partly because we had been able to demonstrate our value to education, even though most of what we were demonstrating was within research. So at that time, all of the interest was how many community groups you served, how many projects you did. Now where I am, the interest is how many students, what discipline. And to some degree, people care about the organisations, but in my management structure now, the focus is all on the education side. But even so, we have currently got a public engagement with research working group in the university, and I'm sitting on it because I want to make sure that what we do is understood as contributing to research as well, even though most of my reporting is now done through education. So you have to kind of keep an eye in the different arenas and make sure that people in different parts of the institution understand the value of what you do. And that is about maintaining a listening ear, keeping an eye on Twitter, knowing if your senior managers change, who the new person is, what it is that they're interested in. The other thing that we didn't say in this booklet, and someone pointed out afterwards, and I thought, oh my goodness, I can't believe we didn't say that, was the point about using students. Because certainly in the UK context, the student voice is really, really important. And students are clear they want this sort of work. So if you need to mobilise, the student voice can be a really important mechanism in that. And the other thing, and this is from the Dutch Science Shop experience, keeping the international links alive is really important as well. They mounted an international campaign to fight off the attack on Dutch science shops. And yes, they made some losses, but they still held on to quite a lot of the infrastructure, and the international campaign was quite important for that. So the thing of keeping links to your international network is really important. But those are the key things, and I'm not going to labour some of this because I really want some time to hear from people. Key recommendations: build as many links as you can across as many people as you can. Persistence, enthusiasm and commitment are essential, so you just have to keep it up. It takes time to convince key people of the relevance, which in turn can lead to policy change. And I know this I had in the research side at the start was very cool about what we really think it was the kind of thing universities should be doing. And somehow over time, he gradually started to think, actually, no, this is really important because it's sort of cost neutral for the university and we can demonstrate research impacts here. But it took probably a process of 18 months and some serious questioning for us to really make sure that he understood it properly. And then he was one of our biggest advocates. And also when a policy gain is made, it's important to monitor and make sure just because something's written doesn't mean it happens. Having it written means there's space for it to happen, but you might need to make sure that it is happening. I'm not going to go on about this too much. This is simply the recommendations from the PERARES project. The one thing that I would say is the first two recommendations there about following up with DG Education and further enhancing knowledge of key strategic drivers in teaching and learning were exactly what we did in the EnRRICH project, which was the follow-on project. And in fact, the PERARES recommendations said something along the lines of, we think it's really important that the Science Within For Society section think about supporting curriculum development for public engagement, because if you want engaged researchers, then you need to work in the curriculum to get them. And a funding stream came out in that area the next year. So I think to some degree we were pushing at an open door, but I think the fact that we made that recommendation perhaps encouraged them to think about opening a funding stream, which then EnRRICH actually went on to benefit from. So sometimes it's surprising the policy work can have positive impacts that you haven't anticipated. So in terms of EnRRICH recommendations, again, I'm not going to labour them because a lot of them cover the same ground as PERARES, but what I would say is that the thing about supporting academics who work with you in teaching and learning and building an evidence base around evaluation, which my colleague Andrea Vargiu in Sassari has been leading on, those things I think that we are now, certainly I know Catherine and I are trying to take forward in our own missions based on some of the things coming through. And I suppose just as a summing up message, this is us at the European Parliament. I guess the key thing is that the great thing in science shops is most of us are doing what we do because we believe in it. We have a passion for what we do. And what we need to do is to make sure that we're organised enough for that passion to show through. Because I think that when you have passion, you can impact, and I see this with the communities I work with as well. When you speak to someone who's passionate about what they do, you catch a little bit of that passion and you catch some of that enthusiasm. So it's really making sure that you are able to communicate that passion and enthusiasm that probably has brought you to this field of work to start with, that you're able to communicate that in a succinct way to the people who matter. And I think that's probably what I have to say for now. I see some more people have joined us in the meantime. So, Giuseppe, I'll hand back over to you.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, both of you, for doing this fantastic presentation. Now, we invite all the attendees and everybody to share any reflection or explanation to our presenters regarding the topic of work of science shops. So now we open, if you want to do it in the chat, because somebody said that it won't be easy to talk, then you can use the chat as well and we will pose the question. Or if you want directly to take the mic and ask the question, then we could hear your voice, so it will be fine as well. So if anybody has any comment or any question to do, now is the time to do that.
Or even any more ideas as well, because there are always new ideas in this area.
I really liked your presentation. I think it was full of very wise advice. And it's true, I really agree with you, Emma, when you say that we all share the enthusiasm, the passion, and the fact that we believe in what we do. But it's also true that most of the times we forget about this policy work, which is critical for the survival. And I really like the example you gave when you said that there was a situation where the science shop was about to close, but thanks to the strong relationships and to the fact that you had put effort into making sure they believed in the value of it, then it could survive. And luckily, we have seen in Bristol, for example, and in other universities, incredible science shops that have suddenly disappeared. So it's very nice to hear how this sort of advice can really help us in situations that we may face in the future. I also like what you said about the need to monitor whatever you do after one policymaker gives you the path open to implement something, to monitor it and to be able to give feedback afterwards with the results of this monitoring. I think that's also very important. So just to ask one question, perhaps could you share with us a mistake that it happened to you when you approach one policymaker, or when you didn't have the elevator pitch ready, perhaps?
Oh, I would probably have to think about that a bit. I guess I think sometimes what I find is that it's maybe at the discipline level that I find I struggle a bit more. So for example, in the disciplines that we work in day and daily, if someone comes to me and says, how would we work with management or with psychology or with sociology, I can rattle off 10 examples, and it's quite easy. If someone from chemistry, if I'm talking to someone from chemistry or physics, and I know there are some really good exemplar projects out there, but I don't have them properly. Actually, that's something that I think I need to do, because we would really like to do some development work in those parts of the university. I need to have some of those examples right on the tip of my tongue. And I start talking, Henk Mulder had a very good example about bats. And I start talking about that, and then I realize I don't actually know the detail of it to talk about it with a proper discipline-specific person. So I think actually I probably need to develop my elevator pitch much better into the hard science side of things. I don't know what you think, Catherine. You did give one example anyway.
Yeah, well, that was my big boo-boo. But in terms of, I think sometimes you have that moment where you're talking about something to somebody and you say something and you kind of see their eyes glaze over and you realize that's not the thing they're interested in. And I can't just sit down now, but that's you've lost them, and it's a point to turn it around really quickly and think, okay, what are the other things? What are the other things that might hook them in? I mean, sometimes you might have, so for example, in our work, we're based in the Access and Civic Engagement Office. So sometimes you mention access to people. So access is kind of widening participation, from maybe less well-represented backgrounds in there's different terminology used in different places. Sometimes when I say I'm from the Access and Civic Engagement Office, and they kind of glaze over, so then you have to say, okay, give them an example of civic engagement. So you say, and so we do this collaborative research with community organizations where they, so it's really watching people as well, to be able to say, oh, that's going nowhere, or oh, they're bored now, or yes, this is really working, and then keep. So you have to be to practice your amateur psychology skills, I think.
Well, actually, that's where I'm trying to think what the word is, but following someone on Twitter, but there's a word that's actually something more than following, stalking, that's the word, so kind of trying to find out if they're tweeting about, mountain biking, do you have a project about that? If they're tweeting about football, do you have a project about that? Sometimes people will just tweet professionally, but quite often they tweet other personal things. If they're interested in dogs and cats, do you have a project around animal behavior? So before you go to meet someone, if it's a formal meeting, sitting down and actually spending a little bit of time, look at their biography. What is, often senior managers have a role as a research pro vice chancellor, but they have academic research in their background. What's their academic research interest? Can you tie some of the things that you're doing to something that they would be interested in? And sometimes it's surprising, even people with very strictly non-engagement backgrounds have an interest that you can find a way in with. So doing your homework if you know you're meeting someone is really important.
Meanwhile, we have seen that Norbert is also hearing us, and he's asking if it would help to have an archive of best practice by discipline. And he suggests like an index card style. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
Just maybe you have it already internally.
Yeah. But hi, sorry for being late. And I'm just thinking, as you said, to have something in your hand when you start talking, it must be short. We have long project descriptions, and they're too long to just pick them. Yeah, so just in this index card style, title, discipline, stakeholders, and 3 words on the methodology. Yeah, so that you just can flip through and see, okay, so if somebody's asking, here's an example, I can give you some quick information, but when it comes to details, of course, you have to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what we now have are examples and best practice, which is too long to read through in a short moment when you're on the telephone or so.
Yeah,
just an idea.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I mean, I think in the EnRRICH project, which for people who don't know was about enhancing responsible research and innovation through curricula and higher education, a lot of our target audience was actually the educators who want to know the fine detail of how did you do it and how did you assess it, and you know so much of the material that we produced was aiming towards those people. But you're right, actually, for science shops, a very short summary would be much better. And maybe, you know, if we have another project, that's something that we might look at.
Yeah, I remember Henk did something like that, an overview of projects and our requests. It's a couple of years ago, and I think it were 20-30 pages with different projects. But you know, something like that bit prepared, maybe share it on the website. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just build on it, and maybe when we meet next time, whenever that will be, just think about these kind of support for those who give advice to people who want to run a science shop project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, because the discipline-based stuff, there's probably not enough of a cohort in an individual institution. So we had looked at this. We had looked at, would we bring people together within even our institution around particular themes, but we don't have enough. Well, we have our own problems because we're based on multiple different campuses, but we don't necessarily have enough people interested in this kind of work to bring them together on just one theme, because you might have 2 or 3 people and then they might not be available at the same time. But when we're looking at it internationally, yes, we definitely should be able to, to pull together or examples in a whole range of disciplines, or even do something together in a whole range of disciplines. Yeah.
And I think it's my long-standing criticisms of Science Shop, me being the guiltiest of everyone, which is that we're all so busy doing that the thing of taking the little bit of time to write something up or reflect. It's, I think, in the European projects that probably we mostly have the time and the space to do that, because otherwise the pressure is always do more and not necessarily make the time to reflect and evaluate and write it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, we have received another question from Saskia. She thanks you for the presentation. And she was wondering that if you can you use experience in policy work in your own institution to pass on the CSOs in science shop projects? I mean, I think that she's meaning, no. So if your experience can be used also by CSOs, maybe?
I would say more than anything we've learned from the CSOs, actually, because certainly in the Northern Irish context, oh my goodness, those guys do this work all the time, day and daily, and I don't necessarily feel I would have an awful lot to teach many of them. Much more I would be looking and thinking that I would have things I could learn, because well, certainly in the Northern Irish context we have a very strong and very sophisticated community and voluntary sector, and even in projects where they're mainly volunteer based, people really do have an awful lot of experience and are doing a lot there. I think it's probably the same in the Republic of Ireland as well, Catherine.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as you say, if anything, we could be inviting them in to co-deliver this with us, because they'd be bringing all their own insights from their sector. I think they have to survive, they have to be really good at policy work. Yeah.
I also think that the leaflet that you presented at the beginning of the presentation can be also used by them as a tool. No? So I would say yes, they will benefit as well of that. Yeah.
We have another question by our colleagues from East Global. I don't know if they have a microphone and they want to explain it.
Yes, sorry, I was, here we are. Thank you, Kathy and Emma. Thank you very much. It's kind of a long question, and I'm afraid it could be boring. But and we confessed it might come from a mistake in translation. But we were thinking on policy in another sense, or from another perspective, and we were wondering if you know the experience of any science shop project result that actually started some sort of public policy change, or opened the door for an innovative process in terms of services or products. Then we were thinking on policy outside the university or outside our institution. Sorry for this.
Catherine, you're nodding. You look like you're thinking of something there.
Oh yeah, sorry. I thought you'd probably have one first. Yeah. So there was a project that was done with a lecturer and some students in spatial planning in DIT a couple of years ago. They have an ongoing partnership with a community organisation called the Northside Partnership. They work in a kind of a socioeconomically disadvantaged area of Dublin. And they have, I can't remember I think it's called the Healthy Communities Project, but I wouldn't swear to that. And what they do is every year they identify a particular area of research for the students to look at. And so over the years they've looked at, how sort of easy is it to get around, say, on public transport, where the students would go and talk to people standing at bus stops and say, where are you going, where have you come from, how far did you have to walk to get here, things like that. They've also looked at possible, I suppose, use of green spaces and green corridors. And some of those, some of the student research and the conclusions of the student research has been used by the organisation to lobby for policy change. And in fact, one of the recommendations about developing a sort of a green way in the local area has been incorporated into the development plan for the local government in that area. So that's an example of where, you know, the work done by the students and the lecturer in collaboration with the CSO partner meant that the local policy has actually changed. But a bit like what Emma was saying, now that that's in the policy, they're going to have to monitor it and make sure that it's actually implemented. So that doesn't just apply to policies that apply to us as science shops, it's any kind of policy. But yeah, so that's an example of a really nice ongoing long-term collaboration where students every year then get involved in the latest phase of the project, and that has led to policy changes. I'm sure you have some too, though.
And you know, it's the kind of elevator pitch thing that you probably should have something prepared on. But I mean, certainly we would find organisations come to us often because they have an idea of a policy change or something that they want to see happen, and they need some research to give them a robust evidence base. So actually, speaking to the last question as well, often what the students do on its own wouldn't do anything, and it's the organisation who takes it the next step and does something with it. And I mean, I was thinking more on the kind of product side, because we have an organisation we work with in rural Northern Ireland. They are a holiday village for people with disabilities. And they have reed beds, outside reed beds, that they use to treat human waste from the buildings. And it's really important to them because otherwise they would have to pay for disposal. So they had a problem in very cold weather of their reed beds freezing. And they came to us to say, what can we possibly do about this? We don't have very much money to do it, so we need something fairly cost effective. And we had an engineering student look at a range of different products that might help them with this, and then make a recommendation, and there was actually really cost that they were able to use to prevent this from happening. And they did go out and get, so it's that kind of thing where sometimes the impact is that you're able to help the organisation with something that they need, a product or a service that they need, you're able to help them move along. So that's the one that would spring to my mind. But certainly we also have had, for example, organisations have said to us, there was one organisation, in fact, in West Belfast, who had a student project done around examining the health of the older population in their local area, and they used that as the basis for a funding application, and they ended up with a 3-year funding pot. Now, the student work was only one small part of a bigger argument that they made, but it was still part of the bigger argument. And that hopefully in the end benefited older people in that area over a 3-year time frame. So sometimes you have those big wins, and sometimes then there are just small wins as well.
Thank you both, inspiring examples, really, thank you.
In the line with Norbert's comment before, I think it would be very interesting to have maybe a leaflet or a database of examples like the ones you just gave, because I think these ones showed real strong impact. And this is very convincing for an elevator pitch. I was hearing you, and I wanted to buy this science shop right now. So yeah, I think it's very convincing when you show that after the project, because I had a meeting recently with a policymaker and with a colleague from East Global actually. And after explaining all that we were doing, he said, okay, but what's the product? So we were focusing too much on the process because, as you said, we are passionate about the process, but he didn't care about the process. He wanted to see products. And with these examples you gave, they are very good examples to show the impact on the product.
And again, this goes back to my criticism of science shops, which is, I know we have not done nearly the evaluation we should. And that last example was just because I had other students work with the same organisation. And when I went back up, they said, oh, that last project, this is what happened. Because often the impact is maybe a year away from the project being done. So you evaluate at the time, but then do you have time to go back a year later and say, so what happened in the end? And mostly no, because then you're focused on next year's students.
So we need a project for doing that.
Yes.
After some years. Yes, it's true, it's true. Very interesting. Thank you.
Hello everybody, sorry to interrupt. This is IS Global again, and Sophie speaking. I just want to make a comment on what you were saying, because in our InSPIRE project we have a task that is dedicated to the creation of an online database, and I think it's really, well, should respond to what was raised just right now. And so I just wanted to quickly comment that we've been in contact with Norbert to kind of develop the first skeleton of what should be this database. And at some point, we will be happy also to share with more essential players. And so we will convene a meeting, an online meeting, to share what we have sought and to see with you all if it's applicable in your context and if you think we are going in the right direction. So just to give you an idea, if you want to have a look at the moment, for example, on the EnRRICH Living Lab, which is the European Network for a Living Lab, it's just to make a parallel with the interface that they have developed. And so within InSPIRE, we are thinking of developing something that is quite similar somehow to it. So in the first place, to visualize the information of the science of structure, but then the idea would be to introduce also information and data on the project that are conducted in different structure. So it was just a comment. We are working on it, and really the idea is we will be would like to develop something useful for the network and for living knowledge and all the members. So hopefully you can participate at some point before the end of the year in this meeting, and we gather your feedback.
Okay, so it's about to be 3. So just 2 comments, because I see that Andrea has posed another question. Just a short comment. We have prepared an evaluation questionnaire just in case that any of the people who is now in the webinar and have to leave. And then you can copy paste the link we have just shared in the chat, and it's a very short satisfaction survey just to make sure that we have fulfilled all the expectations that the attendees have. And after this short remark, then if you don't mind, we can ask just this last question, and maybe we can end with this very fruitful and interesting webinar.
So, Andrea, do you want to answer the question yourself, or do you have problems with the mic?
No.
Hello.
Regarding the previous, hello everybody. By the way, and thank you very much for this
occasion. I just have to move location. Sorry, because I thought we'd be finished at 2, but I'll stay with you. I just have to move. Okay. Sorry.
So, regarding evaluation, don't you forget that the PERARES project had a work package on that, and that an instrument was developed. And there's also in the Living Knowledge Toolkit in the website, there's a lot of that. So let's not, eventually let's build on that, but let's not forget the work that has been done before. Concerning the previous issue, I want to push this a bit further. What happens, you are sort of a victim of your own success. I'm saying this in relation to two things, like if you have very good results, then these results, they can be appropriated by others and used for other uses, both for science shops. If you're a science shop, and this is the case in some cases, science shop idea is very successful, then the administration wants to appropriate. What happens, and not necessarily then, the science shop will fall into the hands of people passionate or go in the same direction as we want. So we have to be careful with this, with success at times. And also we experienced for the science shop's project result, we have actually it was a science shop project, and then other activities just enchained in that, and it's a very successful thing with a lot of impact. But one thing was very funny to notice is that the methods we used for the science shop projects were appropriated by the local administration, which is interesting enough, you know, but the issue was that they were used as participatory, but they were leading nowhere. So they're sort of throwing a bad name on participatory exercises. And next time we go on the field, we will have to convince people we are not that kind of people. We are working on something serious. So we have to be careful about the results of successful stories on the field, on the ground at least.
I don't think there's anything much to add except to say yes, you're completely right about that. I suppose the only thing I can observe is that at times it's just being focused on relationship building and making sure that people know and understand that you're an honest broker is as much as you can do. In my experience anyway, that's as much as you can do in those circumstances. But I think you're absolutely right that's always a risk.
Great. So thanks a lot to everybody, and very especially to the two speakers that we had today, and also to East Global for the technical equipment they have facilitated. It's been a real pleasure to have you with us. We really believe, as you know, that we can learn a lot from the science shops that have been working for a long time, and therefore we will keep in touch and we will continue to learn from you in the nearing future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Catherine.
I think
Thank you.
Bye.
left.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, Catherine.
Christina, thanks.
Good luck.